Northwood High had seen bullies before, but no one expected two football stars to drench a quiet girl in a wheelchair with juice right in the middle of lunch. No one helped. Not the teachers, not the students. Everyone looked away, except Maya, a black girl with a broken past and silent fury in her eyes. For weeks, she had endured the whispers, the side glances, the unspoken rules of silence. But this time, she stood up. 20 minutes later, on the football field, everything changed, and by the end, no one laughed again. The fluorescent lights of Northwood High hummed with an almost malicious indifference, casting a sickly yellow glow on the lockers that lined the perpetually too narrow hallways. Maya Jefferson, a silhouette of quiet intensity against the bustling canvas of student life, felt the subtle but persistent hum of being an outsider. Her family's recent move, a forced relocation after the devastating accident that had altered her father's life and consequently theirs, had stripped away the familiar anchors of her national martial arts circuit, replacing them with this stark, new reality. She was a national-level martial artist, a history of rigorous training and unwavering discipline etched into her very posture. Yet here, she was just another new face, a black girl navigating a predominantly white, affluent suburban high school where silent judgments often preceded introductions. The whispers weren't always audible, but the sidelong glances, the awkward silences when she approached a group, the polite but distant smiles from teachers who seemed to glide past her with an unnerving swiftness, they were all a language she understood. It wasn't overt hostility, not yet, but a pervasive sense of being othered. It was in the way a group of girls quickly changed their conversation from a lively chatter to hushed tones as she walked by, or the way a guidance counselor subtly steered her towards alternative electives rather than the advanced placement courses her transcripts clearly qualified her for. Each microaggression, each unspoken dismissal, pricked at the edges of her composure, a slow, insidious form of being hurt because of her origin. It wasn't the kind of pain that left bruises, but it gnawed at her, a quiet understanding that her presence here, despite her accomplishments and intellect, was an anomaly that many found vaguely unsettling. Maya carried the weight of her family's unspoken grief, the quiet trauma of a life abruptly rerouted, the martial arts, once her sanctuary and her identity, now felt like a distant echo, a ghost of her former self. Her father's injury had left him unable to work, and the financial strain had been immediate, forcing them into this new, unfamiliar district. She had traded the structured world of dojos and tournaments for the chaotic, unspoken social hierarchies of Northwood, a school where athletic prowess seemed to equate to social currency, and a certain brand of casual cruelty thrived in the shadows. Lunch in the cavernous cafeteria was a daily exercise in observation, tables packed with cliques, a cacophony of adolescent chatter that seemed designed to exclude. Maya often sat alone, nursing a half-eaten sandwich, her eyes sharp and perceptive, taking in the intricate dance of power and vulnerability. She had seen Trent and Blake before, two hulking figures from the football team, their swagger amplified by their popularity and their unearned sense of entitlement. They moved through the cafeteria like predators, their gaze sweeping over the student body, searching for weakness, for a target. Today, their eyes landed on Emily Carter. Emily was a girl Maya had noticed in a few classes. Intelligent, with a quick wit that sometimes flashed behind her cautious eyes. She navigated the crowded halls in her wheelchair, a silent testament to a world not built for her. Her intelligence was often overlooked, overshadowed by the visible marker of her physical difference. Emily occupied a small, solitary table near the back, a book propped open against her juice box. Seeking refuge in the quiet world she found between pages, she was not a part of any clique, an easy target for those who sought to assert dominance through cruelty. The air in the cafeteria thickened, a subtle shift in the buzzing noise as Trent and Blake approached Emily's table. A few students at nearby tables glanced over, a mixture of apprehension and morbid curiosity on their faces. No one intervened. No one spoke up. The disengaged teachers, ostensibly supervising, seemed to be perpetually engrossed in their phones or conversations, their eyes conveniently averted from the unfolding drama. It was a familiar pattern, the passive acceptance of bullying, a silent complicity that festered in the school's atmosphere. Trent, with a sneer that twisted his features into something ugly, leaned over Emily's table, his shadow falling over her book. Blake, his accomplice, chuckled, his bulk blocking any easy escape. Emily looked up, her expression a fragile mix of resignation and fear. She tried to pull her book closer, a futile attempt to shield herself from their looming presence. Trent reached out, his hand wrapping around the juice box. Emily flinched, her shoulders tensing. There was a sickening moment of suspended animation, the entire cafeteria holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable. Then, with a sudden, deliberate movement, Trent squeezed the juice box. A stream of bright, sticky fruit punch erupted from the straw, arcing through the air and splashing directly onto Emily's face, soaking her hair and dripping down her shirt. A gasp rippled through a few tables, quickly stifled. Laughter, low and guttural, erupted from Trent and Blake. Emily's eyes widened, a flicker of raw humiliation passing over her features, quickly replaced by a profound, heartbreaking shame. Her hands trembled, trying to wipe away the sticky liquid, but it clung to her, a public stain. The laughter from the football players grew louder, more confident, echoing in the deafening silence of the onlookers. Maya watched, her jaw tightening, her gaze fixed on Emily's trembling hands, on the sticky crimson streaking her face. The injustice of it, the blatant cruelty against someone so vulnerable, ignited a cold fury within her. It was a fury born not just of empathy for Emily, but also from the simmering frustration of her own silent battles against a world that tried to diminish her. The quiet hum of being othered morphed into a sharp, piercing chord of outrage. She knew, with absolute certainty, that she could not remain a silent observer any longer. The unspoken code of Northwood High, the one that allowed bullies to thrive and victims to suffer in silence, was about to be shattered. The sticky sweetness of the spilled juice, the collective gasp of a cafeteria that quickly dissolved into whispered giggles, the sheer, unadulterated shame on Emily's face. It was a mirror reflecting a different kind of indelible stain. A trauma Maya had tried to bury under layers of stoicism and forced resilience. The past, a relentless specter, rose unbidden, thrusting her back to the suffocating confines of a hospital room, the sterile scent of antiseptic mingling with the metallic tang of fear. Her father, Marcus Jefferson, had been a mountain of a man, not just physically, but in spirit, a former collegiate athlete. He had instilled in Maya an unyielding belief in the power of discipline and perseverance. Their mornings had begun before dawn, the rhythmic thud of their feet on the worn mats of their dojo, the sharp crack of practice strikes, the shared silence of focused effort. He had been her first sensei, her most unwavering supporter, pushing her beyond perceived limits, teaching her that true strength lay not just in physical prowess, but in the unwavering conviction of one's character. A true warrior, he'd always said, his voice a low rumble, doesn't just fight with their hands, Maya. They fight with their heart, and for what's right. Then, the accident, a late-night call, a frantic rush to the hospital, the horrifying tableau of twisted metal and shattered glass. A drunk driver, a fleeting moment of recklessness that had irrevocably altered the trajectory of their lives. Her father, once so vibrant, so full of kinetic energy, was now confined to a wheelchair, the lower half of his body a cruel, unresponsive testament to the fragility of existence. The impact had been immense, not just physically, but emotionally and financially. Their world, once stable and predictable, had fractured into a million pieces. The dojo, a cherished family legacy, had to be sold to cover mounting medical bills and rehabilitation costs. Her mother, a quiet but fiercely determined woman, had taken on extra shifts, her eyes often shadowed with exhaustion. Maya, too, had felt the crushing weight of it, her national martial arts career. Once a source of immense pride and a promising path to scholarships, abruptly halted. The rigorous training, the competitive spirit, the thrill of pushing her body to its absolute peak, all of it felt indulgent, almost frivolous. In the face of their new reality, guilt, a silent, insidious companion, gnawed at her, while her father grappled with the profound shift in his physical capabilities. She felt a profound helplessness. What good were her kicks and strikes when they couldn't mend broken bones or restore damaged nerves? It was in this crucible of loss and uncertainty that Maya had, perhaps unconsciously, chosen silence. Not a chosen silence born of weakness, but one born of a desperate need to not add to her family's burden. She saw her mother's quiet strength, her father's stoic acceptance, and decided to emulate it. To complain, to rail against the unfairness of it all, felt like a betrayal. So, she endured. She endured the whispers about their financial struggles, the pitying glances, the subtle shifts in her social circle as friends. Unable to relate to her new, heavy reality, drifted away. She endured the constant ache of unspoken grief, the raw, exposed nerve endings of a childhood abruptly truncated. When the opportunity arose to move to Northwood, to a new school in a district with better resources for her father's ongoing rehabilitation, it felt like a fresh start, a chance to shed the suffocating weight of their past. She had hoped for anonymity, for a quiet space to heal and rebuild. But Northwood, with its unspoken rules and its subtle, insidious forms of prejudice, was far from the refuge she'd imagined. The racial slights, the casual dismissals, the unspoken biases she encountered daily at Northwood were a different beast entirely from the blunt trauma of the accident. Yet they tapped into the same well of a carefully constructed facade of endurance. Each time a teacher subtly condescended, each time a peer looked past her as if she were invisible, it echoed the helplessness she'd felt in that hospital room. It chipped away at her resolve, making her question the very value of her silent suffering. She had learned to internalize, to observe, to navigate the complexities of social dynamics with a guarded detachment. She had learned that sometimes speaking out only amplified the problem, drew more unwanted attention. She had learned, above all, to endure. But watching Trent and Blake humiliate Emily, watching the juice dribble down Emily's face, seeing the raw vulnerability in her eyes, shattered that carefully constructed defense. It wasn't just about Emily, it was about every unspoken slight, every dismissive glance, every quiet moment of injustice Maya had endured since arriving at Northwood. It was about her father, stripped of his independence by a senseless act. It was about the silent complicity of the onlookers, the teachers engrossed in their phones, the students who looked away. This wasn't a private pain to be silently endured. This was a public act of cruelty, a stark reminder of the corrosive power of unchecked arrogance and the devastating impact of apathy. A familiar knot tightened in Maya's stomach, the same knot that had formed before a particularly challenging martial arts tournament, before a difficult board break. It was the sensation of a choice being made, a line being crossed. Her father's words echoed in her mind, "Fight with your heart," and for what's right, the silent endurance she had practiced for so long, the self-imposed detachment, felt like a betrayal of everything he had taught her, the fear of drawing attention, of being seen as the angry black girl, dissolved under the scorching heat of righteous indignation. She had chosen silence for too long. But this public humiliation of an innocent, vulnerable person was a boundary she could not, would not, allow to stand unchallenged. The quiet fury that had simmered beneath her calm exterior for weeks now ignited, a wildfire consuming her carefully constructed walls of endurance. The incident in the cafeteria, the sickening splash of juice, and Emily's profound humiliation had burned a new, sharp awareness into Maya. Yet, the following days were a study in Northwood's practiced indifference. Life, for the majority of the student body and faculty, simply flowed on, as if the indignity Emily suffered had been a fleeting, inconsequential moment. Trent and Blake, emboldened by the lack of any official consequence, strutted through the halls with an even greater swagger, their laughter a constant, grating reminder of their impunity. Maya, however, found herself caught in a new subtle current of isolation, a consequence of her quiet observation, her refusal to simply look away. She tried, genuinely, to re-engage with the rhythm of school life. She excelled in her classes, her intelligence a sharp contrast to the casual apathy she sometimes encountered. In English, her incisive literary analysis earned her a grudging nod from the stern Miss Albright. In history, her nuanced understanding of social movements impressed even Mr. Harrison, the notoriously cynical teacher. But academic achievement, she quickly realized, was not the currency that bought acceptance at Northwood. The systemic abuse wasn't always a direct act of malice. It was often a quiet erosion of opportunity, a subtle denial of belonging. Maya discovered that the more she excelled, the more she pushed back against the unspoken boundaries, the more she became an anomaly, a disruption to the comfortable status quo. When she inquired about joining the debate team, a club known for its competitive spirit and intellectual rigor, the advisor, Mr. Henderson, seemed to suddenly remember a cap on new members. Despite clear vacancies, he suggested, with an almost imperceptible hint of a patronizing smile, that perhaps the Arts and Crafts Club might be a better fit for her creative expression, an absurd suggestion given her analytical mind. The implication was clear: stay in your lane. Socially, the chasm widened. The few tentative approaches she had made towards friendship withered under the cold gaze of group exclusivity. Lunchtime was a stark reminder of her solitary existence. She would watch girls she'd approached in class, girls who'd seemed friendly enough, suddenly become engrossed in their phones or intense conversations when she neared their table. The whispers weren't about Emily anymore. They were, Maya suspected, about her, the girl who had almost intervened, the girl who watched too closely, the girl who didn't quite fit. The teachers, meanwhile, maintained a facade of order while conspicuously avoiding anything that might disrupt their comfortable routines. Mrs. Davies, the cafeteria supervisor, who had been within clear sight of the juice incident, suddenly developed an obsessive interest in the cleanliness of the tables the day after, her gaze sweeping over everything but the perpetrators. During class, if Maya tried to subtly mention the pervasive bullying or the disregard for student well-being, her comments were either politely dismissed or swiftly redirected to the curriculum, a silent message that such inconvenient truths were not to be uttered in the hallowed halls of academia. It was during gym class, a mandatory elective, that the systemic nature of Northwood's social hierarchy became painfully clear. The football team, led by Trent and Blake, operated with an almost untouchable aura. They regularly commandeered the prime sections of the gym, their boisterous laughter echoing off the walls, often at the expense of smaller, less athletic students. Coach Miller, a burly man whose primary allegiance seemed to be to the success of his football program, turned a blind eye to their casual dominance, even when their roughhousing veered into outright harassment. Maya observed them mocking a timid freshman struggling with push-ups, their taunts growing louder with each failed attempt. Coach Miller, standing nearby, merely barked at the freshman to pick up the pace, never once addressing the tormentors. Maya tried to focus on her own exercises, the familiar burn in her muscles a welcome distraction from the toxic environment. But the constant low hum of injustice, the daily microaggressions, the explicit privilege of the football team, it was all a suffocating blanket. It wasn't just about Emily anymore. It was about the entire ecosystem of Northwood, where certain students were allowed to thrive at the expense of others, where a quiet form of oppression was woven into the fabric of everyday life. She noticed Emily, too, struggling. The wheelchair was already a challenge in the crowded hallways. But now, a new layer of psychological burden had been added. Emily kept her head down more often, her shoulders hunched, her gaze fixed on the ground. She ate lunch in the library, a quiet refuge where the predatory eyes of Trent and Blake couldn't reach her. The incident had not only humiliated her, but had also effectively isolated her further. This was the insidious nature of unchecked bullying. It didn't just inflict a moment of pain, it left a lingering shadow of fear and withdrawal. One afternoon, in the dimly lit art room, Maya found herself sketching, her pencil moving with furious precision, capturing the stark lines of a gargoyle perched outside a window. The art teacher, Miss Bierce Rodriguez, a kind but often overwhelmed woman, approached her. "Maya," she said softly, her voice barely a whisper. "Your work is powerful, but there's a certain intensity in it." "Everything all right?" Maya hesitated, the unspoken rule of silence warring with a desperate need to acknowledge the festering rot she perceived. She simply nodded, a tight, controlled movement, just observing. "Miss Rodriguez," she replied, her voice carefully neutral. Miss Rodriguez sighed, a sound heavy with resignation. "This school, it can be a difficult place for some," she murmured, her eyes briefly meeting Maya's. A flicker of understanding passing between them before she quickly averted her gaze. Retreating to her desk in the relative safety of her grading, it was a fleeting moment of recognition, a glimpse behind the facade, but it solidified Maya's conviction. Even those who saw it, those who felt the wrongness of it, were too afraid, too weary, or too complicit to act. The weight of her own past, the silent suffering after her father's accident, had taught her to endure. But the daily spectacle of Northwood's systemic indifference, the casual cruelty of its privileged few, and the devastating impact it had on students like Emily, was pushing her past the breaking point. It was no longer about personal endurance. It was about witnessing the collective failure of a system to protect its most vulnerable. The quiet defiance in her soul, honed by years of martial arts discipline, began to stir, shedding the remnants of her self-imposed silence. She had witnessed the injustice, understood its roots in apathy and privilege, and now a new kind of resolve was solidifying within her. The path of least resistance was no longer an option. The time for silent observation was over. The sterile hum of the cafeteria, once a dull drone of indifference, suddenly crackled with a new, dangerous energy for Maya. It was the same cafeteria where Emily had been humiliated, a space now imbued with the heavy scent of unaddressed injustice. Days later, Trent and Blake, their faces etched with the kind of smug arrogance only unchecked power could cultivate, were at it again. This time, their target was a smaller, timid boy named Alex, who had accidentally bumped into Trent, causing a cascade of dropped books and a scattering of notes. Alex, mortified, scrambled to collect his things, his face crimson. Trent, however, saw an opportunity. He kicked at Alex's scattered papers, sending them skittering under tables. Then loomed over him, a dark, intimidating shadow. Blake snickered, blocking the aisle. The usual tableau unfolded, students looking away, teachers conspicuously absent, the familiar paralysis of fear gripping the space. But Maya had shed the cloak of passive observation, the quiet fury, honed by the echoes of her father's words and the raw memory of Emily's shame, had solidified into an unyielding resolve. This wasn't about Emily anymore, or even just Alex. It was about the insidious rot that allowed such cruelty to flourish. She saw the fear in Alex's eyes, a fear that mirrored Emily's, a fear that had once been her own. This was Northwood's ugly truth, laid bare, without a moment of hesitation. Maya moved. Her steps were quiet, deliberate, cutting through the usual cacophony of the cafeteria like a knife. The sudden stillness that descended upon her immediate vicinity was almost palpable. Trent, engrossed in his bullying, didn't notice her until she was standing directly behind him, her presence a cold, unwavering wall. "Leave him alone." Maya's voice was low, devoid of emotion, yet it cut through the air with a chilling precision. It wasn't a plea, it was a command. Trent, startled, spun around, his eyes narrowing as he recognized her. He smirked, the easy confidence of a bully accustomed to unchallenged dominance returning. Well, if it isn't the new girl, what's it to you, tough guy? He took a step towards her, his bulk intended to intimidate. Blake moved to flank him, their combined presence designed to overpower. Maya stood her ground, her gaze unblinking. She didn't raise her voice, didn't flinch. He dropped his books. You don't need to kick them. Her eyes flickered to Alex, who was now frozen, wide-eyed, watching the unfolding confrontation. Trent scuffed him off. Or what? You gonna cry to mommy? He tried to brush past her, a dismissive gesture. But Maya, with the practiced precision of years of martial arts training, shifted her weight, a subtle, almost imperceptible movement that effectively blocked his path without touching him. It was a physical assertion of boundaries, a nonverbal challenge. A ripple of murmurs went through the nearby tables. Students, who had been looking away moments before, now watched with a mixture of disbelief and growing tension. This wasn't the usual whispered gossip. This was direct confrontation, an unheard-of rebellion against the established order. You're standing in my way. Trent growled, his voice losing its playful edge, a hint of genuine annoyance creeping in. And you're picking on someone weaker than you, Maya retorted, her voice still quiet, but with an edge of steel. Is that what you call being strong? Kicking books and making a freshman cry? Blake stepped forward, his fists clenching. Watch your mouth, girl. You don't know who you're talking to. I know exactly who I'm talking to, Maya said, her gaze sweeping over both of them, an unnerving calmness in her eyes. Two cowards who need to pick on people in wheelchairs or little kids to feel big. The words hung in the air, a public accusation that silenced the last lingering whispers. The color drained from Trent's face, replaced by a flush of angry red, the reference to Emily. The unacknowledged act of cruelty had hit a nerve at D'Acquasano. His casual cruelty was acceptable, but being called out on it, especially by a girl who dared to stand up to him, was an affront. You want to talk tough, Trent snarled, taking another step forward, his hand clenching into a fist. Maybe you need a lesson. Before he could complete the thought, a voice, soft but clear, cut through the tension. She's right. Everyone turned. Emily Carter, her wheelchair navigated silently to the edge of the confrontation, was looking directly at Trent and Blake. Her face, usually guarded and withdrawn, held a surprising firmness. You poured juice on me, for no reason, and now you're doing it to him. She gestured to Alex, who still huddled on the floor. Her voice gained a slight tremor, but she didn't look away. It's not strong, it's just cruel. A collective gasp rippled through the cafeteria. Emily, the quiet, overlooked girl, was speaking up. Her voice, though soft, carried the weight of her recent humiliation, lending an undeniable moral authority to Maya's defiance. It was the crucial support Maya needed, a living embodiment of the injustice she was confronting. It shifted the dynamic from a simple standoff to a public reckoning. Trent and Blake, momentarily stunned by Emily's unexpected intervention, faltered, their bravado, built on the assumption of their victim's silence, cracked. They looked at each other, then back at Maya, then at Emily, then at the growing circle of silent, watching students. The casual amusement had vanished from their faces, replaced by a mixture of anger and a dawning comprehension that this was no longer a private bullying session. This was becoming a spectacle, and they were suddenly on the wrong side of public opinion. A teacher, Mr. Davies, finally emerged from behind a row of vending machines, drawn by the unusual silence. His eyes widened as he took in the scene. Trent and Blake, looking cornered, Maya standing firm, Emily in her wheelchair, bravely articulating the truth. What's going on here, Mr. Davies asked, his voice wavering, clearly unnerved by the intensity of the standoff. Trent, seizing the opportunity to regain some semblance of control, pointed at Maya. She started it. Mr. Davies, she's trying to pick a fight. I'm just saying they should leave Alex alone, Maya stated calmly, not breaking eye contact with Trent, and maybe apologize to Emily. Emily, emboldened, nodded her head slightly, her gaze fixed on the two football players. Mr. Davies, caught between his desire to maintain order and his clear discomfort with confronting the football team, cleared his throat. All right, everyone, let's disperse. Trent, Blake, you two, with me. Alex, are you all right? The immediate crisis was diffused, but the tension had only escalated. Trent and Blake shot venomous glances at Maya, their eyes promising retribution, as they were grudgingly led away by Mr. Davies. Trent muttered, loud enough for Maya to hear, "You think you're tough? We'll see about that. You want to fight? New girl. You'll get one. Meet us on the football field in 20 minutes." His words were a challenge, a threat, and a premonition. Maya didn't flinch. She simply watched them go, a small, almost imperceptible nod of acceptance on her face. Her first act of resistance had drawn blood, not physical, but social. And now, the true confrontation was inevitable. The 20 minutes would be just enough time to prepare. The silent observer was gone, replaced by a warrior ready to fight, not just for herself, but for the truth that Northwood High had tried so hard to silence. The challenge had been issued, loud enough for a dozen students to hear, and in the unspoken code of Northwood High, it was an invitation that could not be refused. 20 minutes, enough time for the rumor mill to churn, for the word to spread like wildfire through the lunch period. By the time Maya walked onto the football field, a chill breeze whipping her hair across her face, a significant crowd had already gathered. Students spilled out of the cafeteria doors, clustered on the bleachers, and lined the perimeter of the field, their faces a mixture of eager anticipation, nervous curiosity, and a few, genuine concern. The late afternoon sun cast long, dramatic shadows across the manicured grass, highlighting the figures already waiting at midfield. Trent and Blake stood shoulder to shoulder, flanked by three other hulking members of the football team, their expressions a predatory blend of sneering confidence and barely concealed aggression. They were dressed in their practice gear, a clear sign they anticipated a physical altercation, a brawl they expected to win through sheer size and intimidation. Their eyes, dark and narrowed, fixed on Maya, who approached alone, her stride measured, her posture radiating a quiet, unyielding strength that seemed to contradict her relatively slender frame. "Look what the cat dragged in," Trent sneered, his voice booming across the field. Playing to his audience. "Thought you were gonna chicken out. New girl." His teammates chuckled, a low, guttural sound. Maya stopped a few feet away, her hands relaxed at her sides. She surveyed the group, her gaze briefly meeting each of their eyes. Unwavering. "You asked for this," she stated, her voice clear and calm, cutting through the bluster. "What is it you hope to achieve? More spilled juice, more bullying?" Blake scoffed. "We're going to teach you a lesson, smart mouth. You don't come to our school and start pushing people around." He took a step forward, his fists clenching and unclenching. "Pushing people around," Maya repeated, a hint of something like pity in her tone. "That's your specialty, isn't it? When no one's looking, when your victims are smaller, weaker, or can't fight back." Her eyes flickered to Emily, who had bravely made her way to the edge of the bleachers, accompanied by Alex, both of them watching with bated breath. Their presence was crucial. They were not just witnesses, but living evidence of the bullying that had necessitated this confrontation. Trent's face hardened. "All right, enough talk. You want a piece of us? Come get it!" He lunged forward, a clumsy, powerful swing aimed at Maya's head. It was a street fight move, raw and untutored. What happened next defied the expectations of everyone watching. Maya didn't dodge backward. Instead, she took a lightning-fast step into his attack, her body a blur of motion. She executed a perfect, almost imperceptible sidestep, a fraction of an inch from where his fist would have connected, and simultaneously, her hand snapped out, not to strike, but to deftly hook his wrist. With a fluid, almost dance-like movement, she used his own momentum, twisting his arm just enough to throw him off balance. Trent, caught completely by surprise, stumbled forward, his powerful swing now carrying him awkwardly past her, leaving him momentarily off-kilter and vulnerable. He barely caught himself from falling flat on his face. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. This wasn't a timid girl. This was something else entirely. Blake, enraged by his friend's embarrassment, charged next, a bellow of fury escaping his lips. He was faster, more agile than Trent, but just as predictable in his aggression. He launched a wild kick aimed at Maya's midsection. Again, Maya's movements were economical, precise. She didn't meet the force head-on. With another subtle shift of her body, she rotated, allowing the kick to pass harmlessly by her side, a mere breath from her hip. As his leg extended past her, she spun, her elbow brushing his knee, forcing him to overextend and twist. Blake lost his footing, his arms flailing, and he went down with an undignified thud, sprawling on the grass. The silence from the crowd was deafening, quickly followed by a scattering of incredulous murmurs. Two of the biggest, most intimidating players on the football team, rendered clumsy and ineffective by a girl half their size, without her even throwing a punch. Trent scrambled to his feet, his face crimson with humiliation and rage. "Get her!" he roared at his teammates, who had been standing, dumbfounded. The three other players, seeing their leader so easily dispatched, hesitated, but the roar of their captains spurred them on. They fanned out, attempting to surround Maya, their movements less precise, more chaotic than their intended victims. Maya moved like water, flowing between their attacks. A wide swing from one guy was met with a swift pivot, causing him to almost collide with his own teammate. A clumsy grab from another was met with a practiced wrist lock, twisting his arm just enough to make him yelp and release her. Without any real harm, she never struck them. She merely redirected their force, exploited their lack of balance, and used their own aggression against them. It was a masterclass in defensive martial arts, a demonstration of control and power that bypassed brute force entirely. Each evasion, each subtle deflection, served as a silent, damning indictment of their reliance on intimidation and their utter lack of genuine skill. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, morphing into a buzz of excited disbelief. Phones were pulled out, their screens lighting up as students began recording the unfolding scene. This wasn't just a fight. This was a spectacle, a public shaming of the school's bullies by someone who clearly operated on an entirely different level. The evidence was unfolding in real time, captured by dozens of cameras, Trent and Blake and their friends, red-faced, panting, increasingly frustrated, trying to land a single hit on a girl who moved with impossible grace, making them look foolish and incompetent. Trent, desperation etched on his face, picked up a discarded football and lunged, intending to tackle her. Maya, seeing the predictable move, waited until the last possible second. As he dove, she performed a lightning-fast crouch, allowing him to sail harmlessly over her head. Then, with a burst of power from her legs, she straightened, sending him off balance midair. He landed with a heavy groan, the football bouncing several feet away. "This is what you call strength." Maya's voice cut through the air, clear and resonant, amplified by the sudden hush. She gestured to Trent and Blake, both now sprawled awkwardly on the ground, looking thoroughly defeated and utterly ridiculous. Bullying the weak, pouring juice on a girl in a wheelchair, ganging up on someone smaller than you, and when someone stands up to you. This is all you've got. She walked calmly to the football, picked it up, and held it out to Trent, who was slowly pushing himself up. "You call yourselves athletes. You call yourselves strong." Trent, breathing heavily, stared at her, his earlier bravado completely shattered, replaced by a raw, burning humiliation. Blake, rubbing his arm, looked away, unable to meet her gaze. The crowd was no longer silent. A wave of murmurs, some of admiration, some of shocked awe, washed over the field. A few students even cheered, tentative at first, then growing louder. Just then, the shrill blast of a whistle cut through the air. Coach Miller, his face a mask of disbelief and anger, stormed onto the field, followed by Principal Hastings, who looked utterly mortified. They had clearly been alerted by the commotion. "What in God's name is going on here?" Coach Miller roared, his eyes wide as he took in the sight of his star players disheveled and humiliated, and Maya standing calmly amidst them. He pointed at Maya. What do you think you're doing?" "I was teaching them a lesson." "Coach," Maya said, her voice steady, not an ounce of fear in it. She turned to face the arriving adults, her eyes meeting Principal Hastings's. "A lesson about what real strength is and what real cowardice looks like." Her gaze flickered to Trent and Blake, then back to the principal. The dozens of glowing phone screens in the crowd, recording every angle, were now the emerging evidence, undeniable and irrefutable. The climactic confrontation was over, but its consequences had just begun to unfold. The aftermath was swift and brutal for Trent and Blake, a public fall from grace that reverberated through the carefully constructed social hierarchy of Northwood High. Principal Hastings, her face a mask of tight-lipped fury, ushered Maya, Trent, Blake, Emily, and Alex into her office. The pervasive hum of student chatter in the hallways had been replaced by an excited, conspiratorial buzz, as whispers about the fight and the new girl who took down the football team spread like wildfire. The principal's office, usually a bastion of quiet authority, was a pressure cooker of tension. Coach Miller, his face a mottled red, stood beside Trent and Blake, clearly anticipating a quick dismissal of Maya's actions. But the game had changed. "So," Principal Hastings began, her voice dangerously calm, "can someone explain to me what happened on the football field?" Her gaze, however, rested pointedly on Maya, before Trent could launch into his pre-rehearsed narrative of provocation. Maya spoke, her voice clear and composed. "Trent and Blake have been harassing students. Principal Hastings, first Emily, by pouring juice on her in the cafeteria, and today, Alex, by kicking his books and intimidating him." She paused, her gaze sweeping over the two football players, who shifted uncomfortably under her steady stare. "When I asked them to stop, they challenged me to a fight on the football field." "That's not what happened," Trent blustered, his voice cracking. "She attacked us. She's crazy. Is that so?" Principal Hastings raised an eyebrow, a chilling glint in her eyes. She turned to Emily. "Emily, what did you see?" Emily, though still a little shy, found a newfound courage. Maya asked them to leave Alex alone. And then Trent challenged her. He said to meet them on the field. She looked at Trent and Blake, her voice gaining strength. They were always picking on people, and no one ever did anything. Her words, simple and direct, carried the undeniable weight of truth. Then, Alex, emboldened by Emily's bravery, spoke up. "They kicked my books, Principal, and they were laughing at me. And then they told Maya to meet them." Coach Miller interjected, his voice gruff. "Principal, with all due respect, these are star athletes. This new girl clearly provoked them. She's probably just trying to cause trouble." Principal Hastings held up a hand, silencing him. "Coach, I understand your concern for your players. However, I have received no less than a dozen videos from students, sent directly to my school email, depicting the entire incident. And these videos," she paused, a dramatic beat, "show a very different story." She brought up a large monitor, connecting it to her phone. The first video played, shaky at first, then steadying, clearly showing Trent's initial lunge, Maya's effortless sidestep, and Trent's awkward stumble. The next video showed Blake's wild kick and his undignified fall. The subsequent clips showed Maya fluidly evading the other players, making them look clumsy and foolish, never once retaliating with a strike, only redirection. The final clip showed Maya standing calmly, holding the football, speaking to Trent and Blake as they lay defeated on the ground. The crowd's cheers were audible. The visual evidence was irrefutable. Trent and Blake, who had relied on their physical dominance and the implicit complicity of onlookers, were now exposed. Their bluster, their attempts to portray Maya as the aggressor, crumbled under the weight of dozens of phone cameras. Principal Hastings turned off the monitor. The silence in the office thick with implications. Trent, Blake, your actions are unacceptable. Not only for the bullying itself, but for challenging another student to a physical altercation on school grounds. And Coach Miller, your lack of oversight in the cafeteria and your clear disregard for student well-being in favor of your athletes is deeply concerning. Her voice was cold, unwavering. The consequences unfolded with a dramatic swiftness that stunned everyone. Trent and Blake, caught red-handed by undeniable evidence, were immediately suspended from school for 2 weeks. Effective immediately. More significantly, they were stripped of their positions on the football team for the remainder of the season. A devastating blow to their athletic careers and social standing. Their parents were called, and the fury in their voices over the phone was audible, threatening further private consequences. Coach Miller, visibly chastened, was placed on administrative leave pending a full review of his conduct in the pervasive bullying culture within the athletic department. His initial defiance had evaporated, replaced by a sullen resignation. News of the suspensions and the coach's administrative leave swept through the school. Amplified by the viral videos circulating on social media, the community began to respond, not with outrage against Maya, but with a surprising wave of support. Parents, initially wary, watched the videos and recognized the patterns of bullying their own children had reported. Messages of thanks for Maya began flooding the school's anonymous suggestion box. Even some of the teachers, who had remained silent for so long, started to voice their concerns about the school's culture. Emboldened by Principal Hastings' decisive action, the local news, catching wind of the story, sent a reporter to cover the unprecedented events at Northwood High. The story of the new girl who stood up to the bullies resonated far beyond the school gates, sparking discussions about bullying, accountability, and the role of schools in fostering safe environments. The community, once passive, began to awaken. The silence that had protected the bullies for so long had been shattered, replaced by a rising chorus of voices demanding change. Maya, the quiet outsider, had inadvertently become the catalyst for a much-needed reckoning. The ripple effect was just beginning. The initial shock waves of the football field confrontation had subsided, but their profound impact continued to reshape the landscape of Northwood High. For Maya, the quiet anonymity she had initially sought was irrevocably shattered. She was no longer simply the new girl. She had swiftly become a figure of quiet reverence to many, grudging respect to others, and a powerful symbol of defiance against unchecked authority. The school, once a place where subtle, insidious oppression thrived, now felt palpably different, as if a long, stagnant atmosphere had finally begun to clear. The first crucial step in the arduous process of rebuilding was to articulate her story, not just to the local media, but directly to the very students who had silently endured the same systemic abuse she had challenged. Principal Hastings, astute in recognizing the moment's gravity and keen to salvage her own reputation, extended an unprecedented invitation. Maya was to speak at an all-school assembly. This was a clear, unambiguous acknowledgement that the old, failing ways of administering justice and fostering a truly safe environment had been exposed. The grand auditorium, usually a venue for monotonous announcements, now thrummed with an unusual, almost electric energy. Every seat was filled, students whispering excitedly, their collective gaze fixed on the solitary figure standing under the harsh stage lights. Maya, surprisingly composed, projected an aura of quiet dignity. She chose not to speak of vengeance or anger. Instead, she spoke with disarming vulnerability. She recounted the devastating accident that had irrevocably altered her father's life, confining him to a wheelchair, and the abrupt end of her own national martial arts career. She detailed the silent pain of leaving everything familiar behind and arriving at Northwood, feeling like an outsider, constantly encountering subtle discrimination that eroded her sense of belonging. I arrived here with a singular hope, she confessed, her voice clear and strong, resonating through the hushed hall. I hoped to simply blend in, to get by. I understood silence. I understood enduring hardship. My family had faced so much. I didn't want to add to their burden. I truly believed keeping my head down was the strongest thing I could do. Then her voice gained a compelling intensity. But then I witnessed Emily, a girl I barely knew, publicly humiliated. And then I saw Alex, a kid simply trying to navigate his day, relentlessly tormented. It was in those moments that a profound truth crystallized: silence isn't always strength. Sometimes. Silence is complicity. Sometimes. Enduring means allowing the very things that hurt you, that hurt others, to continue unchecked. She spoke honestly about the fear that had gripped on her, the apprehension of being unfairly labeled, of facing further isolation. But she powerfully articulated a greater fear, that of living in a world where cruelty thrived because good people did nothing. It's remarkably easy to avert your gaze, she observed, her eyes sweeping over the assembly. It's simple to convince yourself it's not your problem. But injustice, when left unchallenged, grows. It affects everyone, whether you're the target or just an observer. She then detailed the profound influence of her martial arts training, reframing it not as a tool for violence, but as a discipline that instilled control, perseverance, and the importance of standing firm against adversity. True strength, she concluded, her voice unwavering, is not about dominating others. It's about possessing the courage to stand up for what is right. Even when it's hard, it's about protecting the vulnerable. And, most profoundly, it's about finding and amplifying your own authentic voice, even when fear threatens to consume you. The assembly concluded not with polite applause, but with a thunderous, resounding standing ovation that filled the auditorium. Students, who had once been wary, now approached her, some shyly, some with open admiration, sharing their own stories of bullying and regret. Maya listened with profound empathy, drawing them into a shared space of understanding and solidarity. Her story rapidly escalated into a national sensation. Local news channels picked up on Maya's narrative, framing it as a David and Goliath tale. The raw, viral videos of the football field confrontation ignited a crucial conversation about bullying in schools, racial bias, and accountability within educational institutions. Maya, with the guidance of Principal Hastings and the support of Miss Rodriguez, began to strategically leverage this newfound platform. She initiated a powerful online presence, a virtual space where she not only continued to share her own compelling journey, but, more importantly, amplified the voices of countless other students who had experienced bullying. She actively encouraged them to share their experiences, fostering a safe environment where they could show they were not alone. The traction gained was immense. Other schools, inspired by Northwood's dramatic shakeup, began rigorous reevaluations of their own anti-bullying policies. Parents and advocacy groups reached out, inviting Maya to speak at community events, eager for her insights on fostering inclusive and just educational environments. She even championed the creation of an innovative online forum where students could anonymously report bullying incidents directly to school administrators, circumventing the deeply ingrained fear of direct confrontation. Maya, who had initially arrived at Northwood as a quiet symbol of personal endurance, had dramatically transformed into an accidental yet profoundly influential activist, a powerful voice for systemic change. Her intensely personal journey of rebuilding became an inspiring narrative. She was not merely rebuilding the fractured pieces of her own life. She was actively helping to rebuild an entire community, one courageous, openly shared story at a time. The public impact of her actions was profound and far-reaching, demonstrating that a single courageous act could indeed ignite an entire movement, a true awakening. The shift at Northwood High was not merely superficial, it was a fundamental recalibration of the school's moral compass, a direct consequence of Maya Jefferson's courageous act and the powerful story that had unfolded. The initial wave of public attention, sparked by the viral videos and amplified by Maya's eloquent voice, had forced an uncomfortable but necessary introspection within the school administration and the wider community. The consequences for Trent and Blake, and for Coach Miller, were not just punitive. They served as a stark, public declaration that the old tolerance for bullying and passive complicity was no longer acceptable. Trent and Blake, stripped of their athletic prestige and social standing, faced not only internal school discipline, but also a significant backlash from their own parents. The initial anger of their fathers, primarily directed at the school for exposing their sons, quickly turned inward as the full weight of the public humiliation and the irrefutable video evidence became undeniable. They were forced to publicly apologize to Emily, Alex, and Maya in a mediated session orchestrated by Principal Hastings. While the apologies were undoubtedly coerced, the very act of speaking them, of acknowledging their wrongdoing before their victims, chipped away at their hardened arrogance. They were seen serving detention, their once swaggering postures replaced by a sullen, almost timid demeanor. The social dynamics of Northwood High had been irreversibly altered. Their reign of terror had ended, replaced by a palpable sense of ostracization from their former admirers. Coach Miller, placed on administrative leave, underwent a rigorous review. The investigation uncovered not just his willful blindness to bullying, but a pattern of prioritizing athletic success over student well-being, fostering an environment where a culture of aggressive dominance was tacitly encouraged. The community, awakened by Maya's story, exerted significant pressure. Petitions were signed, parent-teacher meetings were held, and the local media kept the spotlight firmly on Northwood. Ultimately, Coach Miller was not rehired. His departure, a public acknowledgement of the school's systemic failures, sent a clear message: accountability would no longer be skirted. A new athletic director was appointed, one with a stated commitment to fostering a culture of respect and sportsmanship. The community, once apathetic, began to awaken in profound ways. The Northwood Parents Association, previously a largely dormant entity, was reinvigorated. They organized workshops on bullying prevention, invited mental health professionals to speak, and formed committees dedicated to ensuring a safer, more inclusive school environment. Local businesses, eager to show their support for the school's transformation, began sponsoring new, inclusive extracurricular activities, offering scholarships for students who demonstrated leadership and compassion. Rather than just athletic prowess, the local youth sports leagues, 2, initiated new codes of conduct, emphasizing fair play and respect, directly influenced by the public conversation sparked by Maya's actions. The school itself underwent a significant overhaul. Principal Hastings, under immense public scrutiny, spearheaded new initiatives. An anonymous reporting system for bullying was formally implemented, and a dedicated student support counselor was hired, specifically tasked with addressing issues of harassment and discrimination. Teachers were required to undergo sensitivity training and regular assemblies on empathy, diversity, and conflict resolution became mandatory. The changes were not cosmetic, they were institutional. The quiet corners of the school, once breeding grounds for subtle discrimination, now felt less oppressive. Students felt a new sense of agency, a quiet understanding that their voices, if used, could indeed make a difference. Emily Carter, once an almost invisible presence, blossomed. The public support she received, the unexpected validation of her pain, allowed her to shed some of her shyness. She became a vocal advocate for students with disabilities, bravely sharing her experiences with accessibility challenges and social prejudices, inspiring others to speak up. Alex, too, gained confidence, joining the school newspaper and writing a powerful expose on the hidden dynamics of bullying at Northwood. The awakening was palpable. The school's reputation, initially tarnished, began a slow, deliberate rehabilitation, becoming a case study in how a community could address systemic issues head-on. The transformation was not instantaneous, but it was undeniable. The courage of one girl, standing up for another, had rippled outwards, creating a powerful, positive force for change, ensuring that the legacy of Trent and Blake would not be one of unchallenged power, but of undeniable consequence. The transformation at Northwood High was no longer subtle. It was profound and undeniable. The atmosphere of fear had dissipated, replaced by a nascent courage, a willingness to speak up among students and faculty alike. Maya's anonymous reporting system became a crucial lifeline, unearthing countless incidents of harassment. Each report was meticulously investigated by the newly appointed student support counselor, Ms. Albright, signaling a new era of swift, fair accountability. Victims, once silent, now felt heard and protected, and the power of bullying diminished under collective vigilance. Emily Carter, her spirit no longer dimmed, blossomed into a remarkable advocate for inclusivity. She formed the Inclusion Coalition, a student-led group dedicated to making Northwood genuinely accessible for all. Emily championed campus accessibility improvements and facilitated empathy workshops, her once guarded eyes now sparkling with fierce determination. Alex, inspired by Maya, found his voice through journalism, his powerful expose in the school newspaper. Detailing the psychological toll of bullying became a staple in teacher sensitivity training, reminding everyone of the human cost of indifference. Northwood's dramatic transformation became a national blueprint. Educational conferences featured Principal Hastings and Maya as keynote speakers, detailing their journey from reckoning to resurgence. Other schools sought Northwood's guidance, eager to implement similar anti-bullying programs and foster cultures of empathy. The community's awakening broadened into a national conversation, challenging the notion that bullying was inevitable and reframing it as a societal failure demanding collective action. Months later, at Northwood's annual awards ceremony, a new honor was unveiled, the Maya Jefferson Courage and Community Award. Principal Hastings, with genuine emotion, announced Maya herself as the inaugural recipient. The auditorium erupted in a standing ovation, a heartfelt tribute to the girl who had dared to disrupt the status quo. Emily beamed from the front row. Alex gave a silent thumbs up. Maya, holding the plaque, looked out at the sea of faces. This award, she began, her voice clear, isn't just about me. It's about Emily, who found her voice. It's about Alex, who used his words to illuminate truth. It's about every student who bravely shared their story, every teacher who stopped looking away, every parent who demanded more. She paused, then concluded, courage isn't always a grand gesture. Sometimes, it's a quiet refusal to let injustice stand. Sometimes, it's simply being kind when it's easier to be cruel. And sometimes it's just showing up, listening, and being a witness. My father taught me true strength is fighting with your heart for what's right. Choose courage over comfort. Choose empathy over indifference. Every act of kindness, every moment you stand up for someone, ripples outwards, changing the world, one brave heart at a time. The applause was rich with appreciation and hope. Maya had not just served justice, she had awakened a community, leaving a profound legacy that would echo through Northwood for generations.